Major trade and diplomatic news announced this afternoon. The White House, Israel, and Sudan have agreed to normalize ties. The Trump administration brokered this deal between the African nation that borders the Red Sea and one of America's top allies, of course, Israel. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain were the first in the past couple of months to sign peace accords with Israel, also brokered by the Trump administration. As the sands of diplomacy shift in the Middle East after centuries of battle, trade doors are starting to crack open as well. So let us bring in Peter Navarro, senior trade advisor to President Trump. You're smiling, and I think this is
those
an
metaphors
important
working overtime there. Those metaphors are working overtime. Sand and doors.
Hey,
anyway,
I got a smart team here. I give them credit, but let's break it down for our viewers.
Sure.
Trade is incredibly important. There's been so much focus on trade with Asia and trade with Europe. What about trade with the Middle East? And to open up these areas between Israel and these countries, which were previously big feuding partners, tell me what this means for the world and the United States.
I'm reminded of Attorney General Barr's expression about communist China. They're not interested in trade. They want to raid. In this case, we got a case. It's trade, not terrorism. We had a situation with Sudan back in the older days where they were a primary exporter of state-sponsored terrorism. We're now in a new transitional government, and this is a case where economic security for the United States is also national security, to the extent that we can lift the fortunes of very poor countries like Sudan by engaging them economically. That's all to the good, and I'm glad we're not playing by the Kirsten Welker rules. We can actually talk about foreign policy. This is a great foreign policy achievement of President Donald J. Trump, bringing peace to the Middle East. Maybe we can do a redo on that Nobel Prize peace thing and add this to the list and do a redo.
To that end, Peter, who's next? There are lots of chatter about Saudi Arabia, which would not be the biggest leap in the world. I get that part. But today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and President Trump also brought up, I couldn't believe this, Iran. And both said, hey, if there's a possibility of this, why wouldn't we look at it?
I think there's a realization among Middle East leaders that they spent the better part of 50 years going back to the Six-Day War, engaged in fruitless endeavors which did not lift up the spirits or the well-being of the people of the Middle East. And Israel itself is a cutting-edge, technologically innovative country that can bring a lot to the table with these countries when the United States is brought in on that triangle. You can imagine a world, and I think a lot of Middle East leaders, the younger generation, is looking forward to a world where they know the oil's running out and they're going to have to go to the next move, and that's going to be a very different kind of economy. And having Israel and the United States be part of that partnership is a really different vision from what we've been seeing for many, 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 many years. We still have the problem of Iran and its nuclear weapons and its horrific system of repression of women, and that's got to change. But all these other countries are moving along. So it's great for President Trump. I mean, it's too bad that this topic wasn't talked about in that debate. But if I may, I can tell you that that debate may well have won the president the election, or at least won the Midwest Forum, because one of the things that really caught my eye, I've been working on these reports going state by state on the theme of all job creation is local. And if you look at 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, you have in Michigan the Antrim Shale Formation. You've got 8,000 fracking wells there. You go over to Pennsylvania, you got the Marcellus Shale Formation. You got 9,000 fracking wells there.
Let's play that soundbite. Hold on.
Yeah.
Right. Let me just play that clip of that interaction between Joe Biden and Donald Trump regarding oil and fracking.
Sure.
Here it is, and then we can talk about it.
Would you close down the oil
By
industry?
the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement
That's a big
because
statement.
I would stop.
We actually do give
All
it
right.
to solar and wind.
We
And
have
that's
one
maybe the
final
biggest
question.
statement in terms of business. That's the biggest statement.
Okay.
Because
We have
basically
one
what he's
final
saying
question,
is he is
Mr.
going to
President.
destroy the oil industry. Will you remember that, Texas? Will you
Okay.
remember that, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma?
Vice President.
Well, so Texas was probably, or looks to be probably going with President Trump, but that was an interesting moment for Pennsylvanian voters when he flagged them. But, you know, don't discount that group of people as well who are understanding that this kind of transition takes a long time, which I think was Joe Biden's message. But the president jumped on that, and that was an important moment during the debate yesterday, was it
Yeah,
not?
and as usual, Kirsten Welker tried to jump on his punchline, but we flushed Joe out on that.
Not as
Here's-
usual. No. I'm
here's the
going to
math.
defend Kristen Welker.
There you go. Go ahead
She
and do
is
that
getting
all you want.
lots
do,
of
do
kudos
that all
for
you
that.
want. Let's have that conversation after we talk about why President Trump may well have
No,
won
let's not.
Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Again, you got 8,000 fracking wells in the Antrim Shale Formation in Michigan, 9,000 in Pennsylvania in the Marcellus Shale Formation, and in Wisconsin, no fracking. But you know what they have, Liz? They got frack sand in the western part of the state that employs a ton of people. So if you think about all the votes there that hinge on fracking, it's thousands and thousands of votes, and the margins of victory in those states are going to be quite slim. So I think the president did an excellent job there. I think the second thing the president did to really help in those states as well as the rest of the country was to clearly portray Joe Biden as the lockdown president. The beautiful discussion about how these Democrat governors in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania have all erred on the side of a punishing lockdown that really hasn't helped contain the spread. Really, I think, set up a really nice contrast between the two candidates. The last thing, Liz, that the president did yesterday outside the debate
Quickly, 'cause we're running out of
was
time.
the Delphi retirement plan. He's going to really help rescue these Delphi salary workers who were punished unfairly by Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Obama's Treasury Department back then. So I thought it was a good day for the president in the Midwest there with respect to that whole issue.
We will know November 3rd, or at least we'll start to know November 3rd.
I wouldn't guarantee that. It might
Peter,
take
great
a
to have
while. Yes, ma'am. You take
Thank
care.
you very much.